right. Okay. So it's story time. And this week we're talking about, well, the title is Therapist's Therapy. And we're talking about Nichelle and her therapist, Naz, and his receptionist, Belle. So Nichelle is this beautiful young woman. She's in her early 20s. She's got a really interesting history. So here's why she's seeing a therapist. Number one, she got into an altercation with a police officer. She was very young. And this altercation, of course, started as a result of her not feeling like the police officer was doing enough to prevent her father from putting his hands on her mother again. Her mother and her father are no longer together. However, she still needs a therapist for a slew of other reasons that, we just don't have time to get into. Moving forward, today she has a session. Well, she had a session this week, and she never makes it to her actual appointment times. She kind of just shows up when she wants to. And her therapist always reminds her, you cannot do that. I have appointment times for a reason. You are not my only patient. Does she care? Absolutely not. So today she walks into his office and she greets his super cute receptionist, Belle, with a very flirtatious smile. Did I mention Belle was bisexual? She is. And Nichelle absolutely loves every ounce of attention that she gets from both her and her therapist, Naz. So she goes in there, she flirts a little bit with Belle. And of course, Belle loves the attention too. She doesn't really do her best to enforce the rules. We'll talk about that later. So she comes into the office, she's, flirting with Belle, and Belle just gives into it every single time. And she walks her back to Naz's office. His name is Dr. Ignacio, but she calls him Naz. He doesn't like that. So she leads her to his office, she sits down, and Naz walks in. So Naz, as Nichelle is wandering around his office, picking up the snow globe, looking at his certificates and his degrees and his pictures, closes the door behind him and says, Nichelle, we've talked about this. So she turns around very flirtatiously and she smiles and she says, well, it's nice to see you too, Naz. And he corrects her, Dr. Ignacio. And she's like, whatever, semantics. He brushes it off and he points to the chair and says, please have a seat. He finds himself at his seat and they begin their session. So he asks her, where would you like us to start? And she starts with, so I've been seeing this guy. And he rolls his eyes. Now, Nichelle picks up on that and she's like, I'm pretty sure therapists aren't supposed to do that. And so he says, that's because you and I both know what we need to be discussing. We need to pick up where we left off last week. So when I ask what you'd like to discuss, it's more so in the context of where would you like us to pick up on based on where we left off of? She genuinely doesn't care. She's like, I don't want to discuss my father. I don't like him. I never did, and I never will. Moving forward. So he sits forward and he says, what do you want to talk about? And she says, me. I want to talk about me. And he nods and he says, okay, we can discuss you. But discussing you is a large part of discussing what we are already discussing. Your father, your mother, how this has affected you, why you feel this strong, overwhelming sense of loneliness. So she sits back, feigning defeat. And then she says, okay. I believe that what I am looking for in a man, I will not find it. And I think it's because I had these hopeful strong, high expectations for my father to become a better and different man. And it never happened. And he nods. He expresses his understanding and he says, well, why don't you tell me what it is you're looking for in a man? She studies the slight slant of his eyes, his crooked teeth, the charm in his smile, despite his crooked teeth. She thinks back to his sense of intellect, the way he explains certain things, the way he goes into detail. She looks at the way he crosses his hands, and she then tells him, I find it incredibly attractive when I look at a man and his eyes are mesmerizing. His smile holds a level of charm. His words reflect his intellect. And then she pauses. And he nods, expecting more, of course. And when nothing comes, he says, okay, why are those features so important to you? And furthermore, what makes you believe you won't find those features? And she says, well, despite the fact that I've been let down repeatedly by my father, I feel like I'm looking for those specific features. And it almost sometimes kind of feels like I'm looking for someone in everyone. And he leans back now and he crosses his hands. She picks up the snow globe and she shakes it one more time. And he says, well, are you looking for a specific person or are you looking for specific features and qualities? She stands up and she begins to wander around the office and she says, well, I'm not sure yet. She looks at his broad shoulders, the way his biceps slightly bulge when he crosses his hands, his very strong sense of confidence in the way that he always looks relaxed. And then she says, I think it's important for a man to be comfortable in his own skin, to be so confident that he always looks relaxed. So I guess that also means I want some humility as well, you know? And she looks at him, waiting for him to nod to express his understanding. And he nods, looking slightly dazed. She said, as far as physical features go, she looks at his lips, his plush lips. She says, I think it's incredibly important for his lips to have volume. But I also need them to be obsessed with my features. Features that are very intimate. He swallows. And he asks, okay, what features are important to you? She smiles, shaking the snow globe once more. And she ambles back over to her seat and sits down and she says, features like the dimples that sit just above the swell of my ass, the curves that make up my figure, my neck, the length in my neck, the structure of my face, my eyes, my smile, my lips. I need them to want those features in a woman. And he nods once more, maintaining that slightly dazed look. She smiles to herself, very satisfied with what she's achieving. And so he asks her, well, do you think you can explain why it's important for this person that you're looking for to notice these specific features? And so she says, well, those areas, to me, they're a large part of what I am confident in. And I feel that if they're attracted to those features, I'm always going to feel confident around them. I'm always going to feel loved and desired and wanted. He clears his throat and he leans back in his chair and he nods. Now, he's not going to admit that he's at a loss for words, but it's quite clear. So then Nichelle takes it upon herself to gaze at the clock and remind him that we are running out of time. And he leans forward and he says, you're right. Well, I do believe that we've made some progress. We've been able to connect, your sense of loneliness with your father's behavior. Perhaps maybe we should dive into that comment that you made about your mother being broken. She almost rolls her eyes at his attempt to try to maintain the professionalism of this session. And she says, sure, we can discuss my mother's brokenness. It's simple. I never want to be that broken. And when I look at my mother, I'm supposed to see a reflection of myself. I'm supposed to see a woman that I'd like to become. I don't see that. And he nods. And so he asks, well, where is that brokenness? How does that make her broken? And she says, well, there's a huge part of me that believes that once you find that person that you're supposed to be with, that you believe you're supposed to be with, you become one. You continue to look for yourself in that other person. And I have a strong feeling that my father broke her because he couldn't find those features. He never complimented those features. And so she looks away for a bit, trying to find her way back to the conversation that she wanted to have all along. She looks back up and she sees him gazing at the clock and he says, we are running out of time, but I would like to continue this conversation next week. It's clear that he's satisfied that he's been able to regain control of this session, inject a sense of professionalism that was lost somewhere along the lines. So she gets up and she picks up the snow globe, waltzing over to put it back where it belongs. And she comes back over and he's opening up the door for her and she says to him, Dr. Naz, I don't know if anybody told you, but your eyes, they slant slightly at the sides. And you have crooked teeth, but you have a charming smile. And you have a very strong sense of intellect. When you explain certain things to me, I find it very attractive. And he clears his throat once more and gives a curt nod and offers a thank you. A very strained thank you. And so she smiles. And she says, of course, I'm looking forward to next week's session. And with that, she's gone. That's it. Part 1. Stay tuned and make sure that you subscribe so that you can get updates for when part 2 comes out. Thank you.